France arrived at this World Cup with what many believed was the most frightening attacking lineup ever assembled for an international tournament. Kylian Mbappé, Ousmane Dembélé, Michael Olise, and Bradley Barcola formed a forward line that had already produced 16 goals in 6 matches. On paper, they looked unstoppable, almost unfair. So how did a team with that much firepower reach a World Cup semifinal and then fail to produce anything of real danger? Spain did not simply defeat France on Tuesday night in Dallas. They completely outplayed them, exposed every weakness, and made the most feared attack in world football look like a group of players who had never played together before. But this straightforward defeat quickly transformed into a full-blown refereeing controversy because instead of quietly accepting they had been second best, France emerged after the final whistle furious. Their frustration was directed squarely at the referee selected by FIFA to officiate the match. France's coaching staff stood before the media and openly questioned whether the official was even qualified to handle a World Cup semi-final. They complained about the penalty decision and suggested that several other important calls had also gone against them. Suddenly, the conversation shifted away from Spain's brilliant performance and toward accusations that France had somehow been robbed on the biggest night of their tournament. But were they really? Or was this simply the weakest excuse offered by any team throughout the competition? Let's examine what actually happened. First, begin with the football itself because the football alone tells a very uncomfortable story for France. Spain won 2-0, and if anything, that scoreline actually flattered the French side. This was a complete masterclass in control from start to finish. Mikel Oyarzabal converted a first-half penalty before Pedro Porro added the second goal. Between those moments and throughout the entire match, Spain completely controlled possession, dictated the tempo, and dominated every important area of the pitch. Rodri looked every bit like the Ballon d'Or winner he was before suffering his ACL injury, sitting calmly in midfield and orchestrating the game as though it were nothing more than a routine training session. Spain have now stretched their unbeaten run to 37 consecutive matches since March 2024. Along the way they became European champions, and their manager confidently declared them the best team in the world. Based on performances like this, it is difficult to argue otherwise. France entered the tournament as one of the favorites but never managed to establish any real foothold in the semi-final. That terrifying attacking quartet simply disappeared. Mbappé's only memorable contribution was a free kick that sailed harmlessly over the crossbar. That was the extent of his influence. The most feared forward in world football was effectively neutralized. It is worth mentioning every member of the attack because the disappointing performance was shared equally. Dembélé, usually unstoppable at his best, was almost invisible throughout the match. Michael Olise, one of the tournament's finest creators, barely received the ball in dangerous positions. Désiré Doué and Bradley Barcola produced only occasional flashes without creating anything significant. These were the same forwards who had terrorized 5 consecutive opponents, yet Spain made them appear completely ordinary because they rarely allowed them enough possession to become dangerous in the first place. No team can claim to be the world's most feared attack if it spends the entire match chasing shadows instead of creating chances. That is exactly the situation Spain forced France into. Rodri and Fabian Ruiz completely controlled midfield, passing effortlessly around a French unit that simply could not get close enough to disrupt them. Whenever France did finally recover possession, they almost immediately surrendered it again with careless passing. Spain did not need to produce spectacular attacking football. They simply needed to keep possession, and maintaining control of the ball remains the one thing they do better than anyone else in world football. However, the story France desperately wanted everyone to focus on was the penalty decision. During the first half, while the match was still scoreless, Spain delivered a cross into the French penalty area. Lucas Digne attempted to clear the ball, spun around quickly, and accidentally caught Lamine Yamal with his boot as the young Spanish star sprinted in from his blind side. Referee Yvan Barton immediately pointed to the penalty spot, and Oyarzabal converted the opportunity to give Spain the lead. It was the first time France had trailed in the entire tournament. After the match, manager Didier Deschamps could not stop talking about the incident. Standing before reporters, he repeatedly questioned whether the referee was good enough to officiate a World Cup semi-final. He also referred to the officials working alongside Barton and hinted that several situations had consistently gone against his team. His comments clearly attempted to make the referee the central talking point. So let's examine the penalty honestly because this is where France's entire complaint begins to lose strength. Was it a penalty according to the laws of the game? Yes. There was obvious contact inside the penalty area on an attacking player who had already played the ball. Was it a harsh decision? Perhaps slightly. Yamal did not have complete control of the ball, and Digny was simply trying to clear the danger. Even so, the referee's interpretation of the law was entirely reasonable. More importantly, France's own defender Maxime Lucu, one of only 2 players who spoke publicly after the match, did not even claim the decision was incorrect. He merely suggested that it probably deserved another review. That was the extent of France's biggest complaint. A technically correct penalty that perhaps could have received one more look from VAR. Most importantly, the incident occurred during the opening 20 minutes with the score still level at 0-0. The penalty did not take away a match that France had been controlling because they were never in control to begin with. From the opening whistle until the final one, France were second best in almost every area of the pitch. That penalty did not lose them the semi-final. It simply handed them something convenient to blame afterward. And that is exactly why Didier Deschamps' decision to target the referee feels so unconvincing, sitting at the very center of this entire controversy. In the same press conference where he questioned the official's performance, he also admitted the obvious truth. He openly acknowledged that the defeat was primarily France's own responsibility. He accepted that his team had been technically inferior against a Spanish side that knew precisely how it wanted to play. He even delivered a quote that almost contradicted itself, saying, "I don't want to sound like a crybaby," immediately before sounding exactly like one. You cannot spend 90 minutes being comfortably outplayed, create virtually nothing despite possessing arguably the finest collection of attacking talent in world football, and then stand before reporters pointing fingers at the referee. That is not honest analysis. It is simple deflection. Almost everyone watching could see exactly what was happening. Spain manager Luis de la Fuente cut through the entire debate with one simple observation, saying that whenever results do not go your way, there is always an excuse waiting to be found. There is another detail that completely undermines France's attempt to portray themselves as victims, and it came from Spain's own captain, Rodri. He pointed out that Lamine Yamal had repeatedly been fouled throughout the match, estimating that the young winger had been brought down 10 or 15 times without receiving the protection he deserved from the referee. In other words, if the referee's willingness to let play continue favored anyone, it arguably favored France rather than Spain. If one team had a genuine reason to complain about the officiating, it was Spain. There is also another important moment that quietly dismantles the entire narrative suggesting the referee was consistently against France. Late in the first half, Yvan Barton actually reversed a decision that benefited the French side, waving away what appeared to be a foul after Ousmane Dembélé went down near the edge of Spain's penalty area, despite strong protests from Spanish players and confusion over why the original call had been changed. This was not an official spending the entire evening making decisions against France. It was a referee making calls that affected both teams, including several that worked in France's favor. Yes, the appointment of a CONCACAF referee for a World Cup semi-final of this magnitude surprised some observers when it was first announced. But raising eyebrows is not the same thing as proving a scandal. A single penalty that was technically correct in the 19th minute simply cannot explain why a team with this much talent failed to create meaningful chances across an entire 90-minute match. Yet the complaints about the referee were not even the most damaging part of France's evening. While the manager was publicly criticizing the officiating, his own captain was publicly criticizing the manager. Only minutes after the final whistle, Kylian Mbappé stood in front of television cameras and openly questioned Didier Deschamps' tactical approach. He explained that France had been outnumbered in midfield, saying they were constantly facing a 3 versus 2 disadvantage, allowing Rodri and Fabian Ruiz far too much time and space to dictate the match. Mbappé also argued that France should have gone man-to-man to prevent Spain from comfortably building attacks through midfield. Read those comments carefully because they carry enormous significance. That was not a frustrated supporter speaking. That was the captain of France, moments after losing a World Cup semi-final, publicly telling the football world that his manager got the tactical setup wrong. Those were not private conversations taking place behind closed dressing room doors. They were direct public criticism of the head coach's plan on the biggest stage of the tournament. When the team's most important player and its manager emerge from the same dressing room blaming completely different things for the defeat, it becomes clear that something much deeper is wrong. At that point, you no longer look like a united football team. You begin to resemble a collection of individuals searching for someone else to blame instead of confronting their own failures. What makes Didier Deschamps' complaints about the referee appear even weaker is that Kylian Mbappé, despite publicly criticizing his manager, was at least brutally honest about his own team. He admitted France had been far too careless technically. He acknowledged they never played the match the way they intended, either tactically or technically. Most importantly, he said plainly that if you fail to do what is required in a World Cup semi-final, you simply do not win. That was the captain of France openly accepting that his own team had beaten itself. So when Deschamps stood at the next press conference trying to shift attention toward the officiating, he was not only contradicting what everyone had watched on the pitch, he was also contradicting his own captain, who had accepted responsibility only moments earlier. One man owned the defeat. The other searched for someone else to blame. As if that was not enough, another French voice entered the discussion and delivered an entirely different explanation. Ryan Cherki, after watching France be thoroughly outplayed for 90 minutes, insisted his team was still better than Spain. So take a look at the French dressing room after this defeat. The manager blamed the referee. The captain blamed the manager's tactics. Another player rejected the reality of what everyone had just witnessed by claiming the side that lost 2-0 was actually the superior team. Three important figures, three completely different explanations, and almost no sense of shared accountability between them. That is the real chaos. Great teams lose semifinals. That is part of football. But a squad blessed with this much talent collapsing into a public three-way blame game in front of the world's media is something entirely different. That is not simply a disappointing evening. It is a complete implosion. It is also worth noting that much of the French squad avoided speaking to reporters altogether, skipping the mandatory mixed zone despite the likelihood of receiving fines. Even their conduct after the match reflected a team struggling to handle defeat. So what actually beat France if it was not the referee? The answer is not dramatic. It is tactical, and ironically Mbappé explained it better than anyone else, which is exactly why blaming the officiating sounds so hollow. France built their squad around extraordinary attacking talent, investing heavily in a front line packed with world-class players while relying on a midfield pairing of Aurélien Tchouaméni and Adrien Rabiot. Against most opponents, the brilliance of their attack disguised that imbalance because weaker teams lacked the quality to exploit it. Spain, however, are not an ordinary opponent. They are arguably the finest possession-based side in world football. They walked into midfield, took complete control of the ball, and rarely allowed France to touch it again. France's fullbacks became exposed throughout the evening. Their dangerous attackers, so devastating when matches become open and chaotic, were rendered ineffective because they spent more time chasing possession than creating chances. The long-standing questions about whether this French side was too heavily weighted toward attack, concerns that had been buried beneath 16 tournament goals, immediately resurfaced the moment they encountered a team capable of dominating possession. France did not lose this match because of a penalty decision. They lost it in the center of the pitch. Their captain recognized that reality immediately and said so publicly. That brings us to the most damaging conclusion from the entire night. If Mbappé is correct that France were tactically overwhelmed in midfield, then responsibility naturally falls on the manager. That makes Deschamps' complaints about the referee more than just weak. They become a distraction from his own tactical mistakes. He selected the wrong setup against the one type of opponent France simply could not afford to misjudge. His own captain pointed that out almost instantly, yet instead of confronting the issue directly, Deschamps reached for one of football's oldest excuses. For a manager who spent 14 years leading France and delivered the 2018 World Cup, it felt like an unexpectedly small and disappointing way to respond to such a significant defeat. The ending becomes even more painful when viewed in its full context because this truly marked the conclusion of an era. This tournament was Deschamps' final competition in charge, with Zinedine Zidane widely expected to succeed him. That meant this semi-final represented his final realistic opportunity to win a second World Cup. Instead of reaching another final, he now leaves with a third-place playoff in Miami, a consolation match that almost no team ever wants to play. 14 years of leadership, one World Cup triumph, and a remarkable managerial legacy ultimately conclude not with celebration but with disappointment and accusations directed toward a referee whose most important decision was ultimately correct. It is a strangely flat ending to one of the most successful coaching careers in French football history. Over the coming months, many people will debate whether Deschamps, often criticized for being too cautious even during successful tournaments, was finally exposed by a Spain side possessing a far clearer footballing identity than his own. France's golden generation of attackers were not simply defeated in this tournament. They were tactically outthought. The man responsible for solving that problem spent his final night discussing the referee instead of the football. Meanwhile, Spain marched confidently into the World Cup final at MetLife Stadium on Sunday, now sitting just one victory away from lifting a second world title. Based on this performance, very few people would feel comfortable betting against them regardless of who stands on the opposite side. Luis de la Fuente summarized his team perfectly with a statement that also served as a subtle response to France's collection of superstar names. He simply said they are a team, and when they play together as a team, they become almost impossible to beat. France possessed the bigger individual stars, but Spain possessed the better collective unit. That difference eliminated the tournament favorites and sent them spiraling into a very public internal meltdown. No, this was never truly a VAR scandal, regardless of how strongly France attempted to present it that way. The real scandal was watching perhaps the most gifted attacking squad in world football arrive at a World Cup semifinal, create almost nothing of consequence, and then spend more energy blaming everyone else than examining their own failures. That is not how champions usually accept defeat. It is how a team blessed with extraordinary talent but lacking the right plan ultimately falls apart. Do you think Didier Deschamps was right to bring up the referee after the match, or was this the weakest reaction we have seen from any tournament favorite? Share your opinion below, and stay tuned because Spain now await the winner of England versus Argentina, and that final promises to be an unforgettable spectacle.